had to just like pat my chest and say like, we're safe. Look at your, like, go look at the bank account. You have savings. You're safe right now. What do you want to do instead of what do you think you have to do to make that feeling go away? Does that make sense? I was always reacting instead of responding in my business. And that's, I think, was the biggest thing that got me into burnout.
Welcome to the Studio Takeover podcast. I am Kat Ford Coates, and I am here today with Teri Hofford. Teri, welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. You know, I like to talk.
Oh, I love these conversations with you, though. But I'm so glad you're here today because, you know, you are this force in the portrait space in such a beautiful and loving way to really sort of hold space for people to elevate, not just like skill sets and 1, 2, 3, but like their appreciation of our customers as more than walking wallets, but actually being human beings. And even as an educator myself, right? It's like, okay, we lead with the money we can help people make because that brings people to freedom and all of the things. But we started this business out of love. Mm-hmm. You know, and so I love the conversations that we always have about, okay, how do we approach this with love and compassion and maybe even some tough love sometimes to bring people back to center?
Yeah, a lot of times with the tough love, for sure. And I will say that I also got away from like my whole purpose with photography. Partway through, I got addicted to just making money and seeing clients as dollar signs. But I learned through burnout and things like that, that I had to figure out why this work was important to me again. So I think it's like something that every photographer that turns this into a business kind of has to go through that evolution of like, yeah, I'm running a business and like seeing it as that. But then they get a little too far away from why they started in the first place and have to come back just a little bit to remind themselves why they were doing the work to start with.
Oh, absolutely. You know, and the Freedom Course, one of the things that we address is like, look, you build more really an outline. And like, there are some specifics involved in your business plan, right? But the business plan is a living, breathing document. But the core space is that mission and purpose, right? And finding the values that are in alignment with that. And yes, like you want your business to make more and more money hand over fist, right? Like, but then at the end of the day, if you're not paying attention to the mission and the values that are associated with that mission, then that's really where people get a little, well, in Teri terms, pretty squidgy about it.
Yeah, definitely. And that's exactly what happened. Is like, I was making like large quantities of money, but I was doing it in a very systematic way that got me away from my purpose. And then what happened was, as I tried to like heal my body and stuff like that from burnout, then I had to come back and I was almost afraid to start charging money again for doing things that I loved, because I didn't want to end back where I was in 2018 when I burnt out. And so it's been a process now for me to kind of say like, no, we can still make lots of money and do it in a way that's easy and do it in a way that's in alignment and do it in a way that is not, you know, like just because that system worked for somebody else doesn't mean that that was the system that was right for me. But knowing that I can still have abundance with a system that works with the lifestyle that I want and the mission that I have for the work that I want to do, if that makes sense.
Sure. No, it absolutely makes sense. You know, you've referenced burnout a couple of times. How does burnout from like work specifically show up for you?
For those that don't know, I started my boudoir photography business back in 2014, and I like jumped full force into it. I had no business plan. I had no cost of doing business. I had no value in terms of how to charge appropriately for my time and energy, but I had the passion to persist. And so that kept me going for a very long time, for about 5 years, until I was like, oh, I should probably do a cost of doing business. And like, oh, like, okay, we have to start charging more if we want to actually make this a viable business. But what happened was I was still in that, like, no, I have to keep working. And I had tied my identity so closely to somebody that achieves a lot, that
Mhm.
executes a lot, that puts stuff out. So while I was taking clients and I brought my business up, I'd gotten a pretty steady stream of clients, about 10 to 15 a month, and doing everything by myself because I was also hyper independent, of course. And then
Giving
I
me
was like,
anxiety just thinking about that.
yeah. And then I was like, oh, and I love to teach. So let me start working on creating body image boot camp. I started that process. And then I got asked to come teach workshops. And I was like, well, I love to travel, but I never stopped to feel where energy was being zapped from me. I just like keep the passion going. Like I always say, the passion allows you to override a lot of red flags a lot of the
Mhm.
time, of like, hey, maybe you should slow down, or hey, maybe take a rest, you know? And it was around 2018 that I started to realize that I had gotten away from my purpose, my core mission of diversifying the bodies, making the work I do inclusive, and all my work became very streamlined. Like same poses for everyone, same
Mhm.
posing flow for every person, and I lost connection to the work itself in an effort to just make things efficient so I could keep showing up and working. Does that make sense? So,
Yeah.
like, because I didn't consciously realize that I was trying to find ways to preserve what little energy I had left. And one way to do that is to make things as efficient as possible. And one of the ways we can make things efficient as possible is to just plug every client into the same posing flow, into the same system. And at one point, my friend, who was also kind of helping me a little bit, I had, while I was traveling, was like, hey, I need you to deliver these albums to my clients. And she's like, they all look the same. Like all the clients' photos look the same, all the poses are the same. She's like, I don't even know. I, I don't know who these are. Like they look the same because a lot of them are anonymous. And I was
Right.
like, oh no. And that was when I started to really recognize that I had lost the purpose for myself. But like any treadmill, you can't just like stop it. You have to like slowly
Yes.
slow down, or else you're going to hit a wall, which is what the pandemic did. It basically threw me off the treadmill and I hit the wall. And then I had a lot of time to reflect and be like, what are we doing? But yeah, so that's kind of what happened. But even though I was a proponent for body image, body positivity, celebrating all bodies of all sizes, I realized that even though I had worked through the diet culture aspect of my life, hustle culture just took its place
Hmm.
because it does the same thing. You ignore the signs your body's telling you about when to sleep, when to eat, when to drink, when to go to the bathroom, when to get away from people, when to be with people. You stop listening to I wasn't listening to my body. So it just had moved into another category. And I was like, son
Sure.
of a bee, like, we got to work through this now. And so I'm trying to do math, the last however many years since like 2019, 2020 has been me really trying to find my way back to what are we doing? Number one, what are we doing and what are we doing it for?
Mhm.
Because at what cost is this going to be? Like, if I want to do this for a long time, like advocating for people and teaching and doing these things, we have to listen to our body because otherwise the body's going to stop you from doing the things. So yeah, it's been a bit of a roller coaster, but I mean, I believe I'm here to teach through experience. So that's why I get to go through it.
Well, and I like that you bring it back to body because I know for me personally, I will get into that like grind, go, go. And not pay attention. Well, I'll be fine. It's like that teenager, what's the word?
Yeah, rebel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, indestructible, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'll just keep going. It's fine. And then your body's like, no, have a seat. And mine showed up as hives.
Mm.
I was diagnosed with chronic hives at the end of, I don't know, it's been a couple years now. And like, what a miserable way to live.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never been allergic to anything in my life, like ever. Like maybe grass in the spring, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was because I was back and forth to Florida every month and going to Arizona like every couple of months and putting on these workshops and shooting like 12 clients a month and leading 2 associate photographers and la, 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 la. And mine showed up. It wasn't like cat go to bed. It was wear long sleeves and turtlenecks and try not to itch in public. Like,
Well, that's just it. Like all my eczema that I had, or eczema, as they say in the US, that I had from when I was a kid started showing up again. I started having food intolerances that I'd never had before. My whole reproductive system basically shut down. And I was like, it's fine. It's like, it's a blessing. I don't have cramps every month. It's fine. No, that was not fine. That is not fine. Basically, what happened was, I believe, I like pushed myself into perimenopause essentially because of chronic stress. Like I literally my body's like, all right, I guess we're just here now. We don't need to do what we're supposed to be doing now. And it's taken a long time to come back from that. It's taken about 2 years of like not even trying to work, if that makes sense. Like, in terms of like, I'm not marketing as much, and I should let people know, like, I no longer take clients anymore, which was a decision I made last 2 years now, because this is 2024. In 2022, I let go of my studio and I went on hiatus because I couldn't yet separate myself from the identity of being a photographer. And then I took a few clients in 2023 and I was like, no, I think we're moved on from actually taking clients, and our skills are better used elsewhere right now, which is in the form of teaching and educating, which really fills me up. And using my camera in a way that, like, I contribute to the Adobe stock photography diversity program, and things like that. So just doing it in a different way than I had been doing it. Yeah, it's been a journey, but it's been 2 years of not actively sitting in squidge, basically, of
right.
like, I have to stop working and to see what am I afraid of if I stop working. That was a big one for me, was just to be like, let's just see, what are we afraid of? And you can't hear the voice that's trying to keep you, like the fear, if you don't stop, because you just keep feeding into the same behaviors that
Right.
I've always had since I was a kid. And so I knew I had to, nobody else was going to do it for me. That's the thing about being an entrepreneur. Nobody
Right.
else is going to tell you to
can't
go to
outsource
therapy.
that.
Yeah, exactly. You can't. So yeah, and I love self-growth and self-development and things like that, obviously. So I really spent the last 2 years just doing a lot of really hard facing facts about, why do I think I need to work? Why do I tie my identity so much to my economical value? Or being a photographer, like asking questions. Curiosity has been the biggest tool that I've used to excavate a lot of beliefs that got me success, but at the cost of my authenticity.
Well, and I think that's really a terrific like place to put a pin in it too, because there's the like authentic desire that we have to build successful businesses. And then because it's such a positive effect, right? Or the potential is such a positive thing, that we attach our identities to that thing. But then when it isn't quite as successful as we wanted it to be, or not as quickly as we wanted it to be, now all of a sudden we're terrible people and we're all going to die.
And a big part of that was me. So in like when that would happen, because every business has slow periods, things like that. And I kind of knew, I started to know I'm pretty good at noticing trends. So I noticed like January and September would always be lots of cancellations, reschedules, whatever. But it still didn't make it hurt less when people rescheduled until I looked at, because what I would do then, so I would get that feeling, scarcity feeling of like, oh God, where's my money going to come from? I don't know. I would run a fire sale, or I would just like throw spaghetti at the wall, hoping that I could just get a little bit of cash to make my to
Yeah.
calm that fear down. And one thing I realized about me as somebody that's futuristic, I see ahead more than I see the present, that I was making a lot of present day decisions based on fear of the future. And so that's not how you have a business plan, by the way, is by like running a lot of fire sales. This is how you can set yourself up for devaluing what you do and what you have to offer people, if that makes sense. So I had to realize, like, when I feel that initial anxiety that comes up of like, oh my God, there's nothing on the calendar. Oh my God, where's our money coming from? I had to just like pat my chest and say, like, we're safe. Look at your, like, go look at the bank account. You have savings. You're safe right now. What do you want to do instead of what do you think you have to do to make that feeling go away? Does that make
Mhm.
sense? I was always reacting instead of responding in my business. And that's, I think, was the biggest thing that got me into burnout, was the reactionary. So I never felt bad that my business was like having a dip.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So like you were reacting to something that had not occurred yet,
Oh yeah. I would look
right?
ahead literally like I still do it, and I speak with my coach about this. Like where I'll wake up and I'll be like, oh God, there's nothing on the calendar for March and it's January. And I'm like, oh God. And I like will have a panic. And so if I had my client, like if I had my photography studio, I'd be like, we need to just get money in now. Like, so I'd be like, this weekend, get save,
Right.
like I'll waive your entire session fee. So then what happened? You do that enough times, people don't want to pay you full price
Because
because
they're
they just
trained.
wait for all the damn sales you keep putting
Yeah.
out.
No, one of the things, that we've really, leaned into over the years is gift vouchers. And we'll still use gift vouchers to this day. To invite people in for sessions and things like that. But at the same time, it's never a public,
Mm.
like, ooh,
Like, oh my God. Yeah,
yeah,
sales. I
because
felt like a car salesman.
yeah,
Literally. It was like, it's crazy. Like, our sales are wild,
hustle, hustle,
like,
hustle,
yeah,
hustle, hustle, hustle.
exactly. All I needed was a good polyester suit and a mustache, and it would have been great.
Oh, Teri,
But I
Halloween's a
think
coming.
But I think that's the thing with the vouchers, because I've been through the system, like with the vouchers, is that that's responding, right? You're like, oh, I want to give this to this person because I think they would be a good client
It's
for the
tactical, yeah.
service. Yeah, exactly. It's strategize. It's strategy. Whereas reactionary is never strategy. It
Mm-mm.
literally is just trying to save your ego more often than not. And I had to realize the difference that number one, a true business can never be grown through reactionary behaviors.
Mm-mm.
Impossible. You can do it for a few years, but it will not be a sustainable, strong foundation, which is something I had to learn for myself. And you can never strategize from a place of fear. Never. Your brain just does not, it just turns off your critical thinking and there is no strategy
Right.
accessible to you, which is where burnout gets creatives into trouble. Because when your body is physically in a state of stress, you're in a fear state. Your body's like, we're going to
You can't
die.
create.
So
Yeah.
yeah, because it can't see that there is no saber-toothed tiger. It just feels that there is one. And so I had to realize like what impact was staying in this on this treadmill doing to not just my physical health, but also my business. Because that was a
Mhm.
big part that ramped up the insecurity. And then thus it became a self-fulfilling prophecy, essentially.
When you start your photography business, you're like, I get to photograph people and it's so empowering and it's so much fun. And I can't believe I get to do this. And then thinking, your blinders go up that that's the only possible way that you can leverage that tool without realizing that it's a tool. We think it's like a creative skill set without realizing like, hey, there are other opportunities to use this vehicle.
Yeah.
To generate income, to keep you safe. So when your client, your retail sessions kind of take a dip, you're not gonna die.
Well, and that was as a multi-passionate entrepreneur, somebody that likes to have their hands in multiple pots at one time. I think a big part of that came out of growing up. My mom always did. My mom was always working many jobs, but always jobs she loved. Like she was a seamstress, and then we worked at the ski hill, and then she was doing taxes, which I don't know if that is actually fun for people, but she says it was fine. But like, I saw that growing up. So as I went into business, it was natural for me so when I started, I did the photography for like 1 year, pretty much just photography. And then I was like, okay, cool. Now I have like, my brain was like, now we have like a community of people. What else do we want to do with these people? Which is when I started to educate on body image. And then I had photographers reaching out and tell me like, oh, I noticed that you photograph plus size bodies. Like, how do I do that? So I was like, well, let's put out a posing guide. Like, I just kind of always followed the little breadcrumbs, but I think part of that was for safety purposes, knowing that if the photography leg of the table went out, I would still have 3 other legs of the table still standing. Whereas if I had just one leg of a table and that went out, then I would be up shit's creek without a paddle.
Now I'm curious because the answers to this are a little divided. There are posing fundamentals, right? Like that we all just sort of learn on our way, whether we study posing or not. The more people you photograph, you just sort of appreciate, how to pose, quote, end quote. When you were in the space of putting everybody through the same posing system over and over and had a stack of albums that all looked identical, right? Did that space make you a ton of money?
Yes.
Or did that not?
It did. But this is why it was not good for me. The whole reason I got into doing that type of photography was to diversify bodies in the photography industry and the media in general. And so I wanted to celebrate bodies as they were. But the posing that we learned in the boudoir industry, for sure, is all about how to emphasize certain assets that women tend to have, which means making boobs look bigger, butts look bigger, waists look smaller, chins looking smaller, and so on. And I knew those would sell. I knew it. And they did. That's where the efficiency came in, because my brain collected trends and was like, well, we noticed that, out of 50 clients, they all bought this photo. Yeah. Out of 50 clients, they also all bought this angle of this pose. So cool, let's do that. What is it? And my brain just kind of put the algorithm together essentially to say, these are the ones that will sell, so that I could show up to a photo shoot and just put people through the motions, do the thing, make them feel good, send them on their way. But it got away from why I was doing the work in the first place, because I was conforming to beauty standards in order to sell, and not just any beauty standards, patriarchal beauty standards about what should make a woman look sexy, or make a woman look confident, instead of asking the client what makes you feel confident and truly having a lasting change on that client. So I had to have a lot of heart-to-heart talks with myself. So yeah, I did make a lot of money because people just want to know that they can look like the girls they've seen in the magazines since they've grown up. But that's not why I was put on this earth. There are enough people doing that I don't have to. And I will preface that there's nothing wrong if you do that. This is to anybody listening that's like, wow, defensive. Don't be defensive. You do your thing. This is just, I'm saying for me, that this is not why I was put on this earth. I was put here to challenge and encourage looking at things a little differently. And so I had gotten away from that aspect.
No, and the reason I ask is for some photographers, cookie cutting, right, for lack of a better term, either makes you so much money or tanks.
Mm.
right? And like basing things like I know what sells, right? So there are certain poses that kind of get put into the repertoire because I know I want to hit those numbers and those minimums. But I also know that if I do not give myself an opportunity to play with that
Mm.
person that is standing in front of me specifically,
Hmm.
I can take every saleable pose in the world, and without that play, the connection is gone and the money disappears.
Well, and that's what happened. So 2018 was like the height, and then 2019 is when it dipped down. Number one, I was traveling a lot, not marketing, which I'm pretty sure was a big part of that. But also, there was a lack of connection, and so people would hire me for so the stuff I was creating when I was traveling was always fun and creative because I was always in a new place that I didn't know what I could create. So people, that's what I was posting. So people were like, "We want the Teri effect," but I never believed it. So this is
Oh,
where the value came in. I was like, but do you? Because I know that out of 50 people that came in, they all just wanted to look like this. And so I wouldn't believe them. I wouldn't believe my clients that they wanted something different from another client. And so I would just keep cookie cutting because I was like, I don't know. I know you better than you know yourself.
oh,
And in some capacity, I did because I did a test once. This is how I like
justified it.
work. Well, just kind of like work my way through like when I'm questioning things. I'm like, let me just do a test and see what happens. Like always, I'm a explorer scientist this way. So I would show a client like a creative edit or version of a pose that was, and then one that was more traditional, gloss, whatever, like looks more like my traditionally a boudoir photo would look. And 9 out of 10 times, if they had a choice, they would choose the non-creative option. And so I took that instead of taking that to mean, hey, maybe just don't give them options. I took that to mean, oh, we'll just give them these ones, glossed over photos because that's what they want. Then I lost the joy because I was like, nobody wants what I'm doing.
Nobody wants what I want to be doing,
Yeah, even though
right?
they say it, this was like, it was so confusing to me. So yeah, so I had lost a lot. I had gotten confused in all of that, trying to understand my clients more than they knew about themselves. And to some extent, there are a lot of things that I'm able to set expectations for with clients that help them with things that they don't know that they're going to experience because I've seen people experience it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's like some aspect of that where I do know what clients think more than they know themselves. But when it came to that stuff, it was more about me not valuing myself as an artist,
Mm-hmm.
and not trusting that people actually wanted to just be part of my art. And instead, no, they just want to look slimmed down and glossed up. And yeah, so I gave them that because money is good. uh, until it almost killed me, essentially. And then I was like, wait. And then the pandemic happened. So that gave me a really good like time to be like, hold on, hold on, hold on. If we could start this again, what would we do?
Well, and as you transition to like no longer taking retail clients and
Mhm.
focusing on like the education space, how else are you using, if you are at all, like photography as a tool to feed the creative artist heart that is there?
Yeah. So this is where like I know it was a pandemic. It wasn't great, but it was great for me. And not because I know a lot of people actually made a ton of money during the pandemic. That's not why it was good for me. For me, it was good because I got out of my studio. We had really strict lockdowns here that we couldn't go
Mhm.
into our workplaces for like 3 months
No,
at
I
a
remember. Yeah.
time, essentially. And like, so that was the first one, the first 3 months. And then I went back to my studio. It had given me enough space to go into my studio and say, oh no, I've collected all this stuff and it's just stuff covered in dust. What have I done? Realizing that even though I was making money, I was spending it as quickly as I got it because of money mindset stuff I had to get together. But that was a good awareness of like, okay, why did I think I needed all of these things to get clients in the door? right? So that was the first aha. But then I created a deck of cards called The Universe Decides because like we weren't able to shoot clients, but we could still do creative stuff outside.
Okay.
So it started with a dice where my friend, I was like, okay, if we roll a one, this is what happens. If we roll a two, this is what happens, whatever. And then we just roll the dice and that would create our photo shoot. So
Okay.
then, yeah. So then we're like, wait, if we're having so much fun with this, because it would be like drive 10 minutes west, and you have to shoot this type of wardrobe. So it'd be like sequin, tulle, lace, whatever, this attitude or mood with this type of lighting. So it would like put all the pieces in, and we couldn't, you never knew where you'd end up. You never know what it was. So you'd have to make a cohesive shoot based on all those elements.
I have
And
a similar game for the studio. Yeah.
yeah. So then I posted the first shoot of that on like Instagram or something, and photographers were like, oh my God, that's so cool. So naturally, I was like, well, let me make you a deck of cards. So I made a deck of cards that people can buy. And then you just like set up the categories and then you pick the cards or have your client pick the cards. And so I was doing that like once we got back into work, once we were able to go back to actual working. So I'd have clients during the week, but I would use that as my creative outlet for myself and my friends to just go on road trips. Because not only was it good for the creative element, but number one, it allowed me to be in connection with people in a fun way, spend time with friends that still felt like work. So I could say yes to it. It got me outside, spending time in the sun, putting my feet in the grass, feeling the wind in my hair, which is really important to my mental health. I realized that I wanted more of that in my life. And so it was like all these little things that I created in this off season, essentially, like the amount of stuff I pumped out during the pandemic, y'all. Also, it was probably fear based in some capacity, but I made up for like 5 years worth of content just in that year. But like things like that. So I made a point though to say like I can't say no to creative shoots. And then the other thing just recently within the last 2 years, I started having hobbies.
Oh my goodness.
Remember hobbies when we didn't monetize them?
Oh goodness.
Wow. So like it started with like oh, I should say this too. And then the other thing I started doing was taking what I called mini digital detoxes for myself. So I would rent an Airbnb for 3 to 4 days by myself. There'd be no internet. I would only take two books, well, sometimes more than two, depending on how ambitious I was feeling, books and notebooks and one craft. So like embroidery, art journaling, whatever. And that
Okay.
was it. Yeah. And that allowed me time. So I've napped the first day because like I hadn't let myself nap
Mhm.
for 7 years, you know. So I would nap the first day, get all the anxiety of being alone and no internet out of my system, and then nap for a day. And then the next day would really like allow me to be clear in my thoughts. So now I could actually strategize, actually think outside the box, read books that like I hadn't read books in so many years. That was silly. I used to be an avid reader as a kid, and I hear that from a lot of creatives. They don't make time for reading
They don't.
anymore,
They
you
don't.
know? And so
Well,
like
and now it's, like put it on an audiobook and I can listen while I'm working and
while
monetizing
I'm
and doing
working,
something. Yeah.
like, yeah, what is it, biohack it? Like, no. So, like, making that a point was really important to me. And how that came about was I realized for like, most of us as photographers end up having to go for a massage at some point because our shoulders just end up screwed up from
Done.
shooting
Yeah.
and then editing at our desks. So I
Like
started
this.
implementing, yeah, we get the hunch.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I started going for monthly massages like 2017 and onward, essentially every single month. So that way it wouldn't get to the point where I had to go for a massage. It
Mhm.
was preventative. So that was like during the pandemic, I was like, okay, normally what happens is I work, 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 work. Then my husband's like, we're going on a trip on a cruise where you'll have no internet. And I like have a little temper tantrum, which sounds silly because we're going on a cruise. But like I didn't choose it. There's no internet. I didn't choose that. Panic, panic, panic. And then I cry and then I sleep and then I process and then I enjoy reading my books. So I was like, what if I did that monthly as well? So that way I don't have to get to that point where I have a little temper tantrum before I'm about to go on a trip. Instead, I'm able to emotionally regulate myself every month so I don't get into a place of burnout. So I don't get into that headspace of overwhelm and panic.
Mm-hmm.
And now I know that I'm very privileged that I can do that. But this is why you work it into your cost of doing business.
Absolutely 1000% true. And, when it's interesting too that you bring it up into like the CODB of it, we're working through in one of the foundations courses, like, okay, what's your monthly overhead? And people are like, okay, so I need insurance. And I'm like, okay, like, what about you?
Mm,
What are you doing for you? What do you want? And they all kind of look at me and get this kind of glazed over, like, well, I just want it to work. You're like, we've got to get past that part, right? I want you to look at 3 years ago or 3 years from now and say, what is that version of you that is working, is really grateful you did today? And things like self-care, building that into the business, like it's a thing.
Yeah, that was something that, again, but a big part of that was recognizing the value, especially for a lot of people I find in the portrait and boudoir world specifically, are standardly highly empathetic humans that are not used to taking. And so when people get paid, even when they start getting paid from their business, just like me, I was making a lot of money. I didn't feel worthy of keeping that.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, this would make me a not nice person if I have a lot of money. So let me buy things for my friends. Let me spend it on stuff for my clients.
Mm-hmm.
Let me put my money over here instead of saying like, okay, but what do we need for us? Like, again, I should also preface I'm in Canada, so I don't have to really worry as much about healthcare and things like that. So we don't have to pay for that. But still, there are other appointments that make me feel good that I need to go to that cost money. But it was always easier, and not just money, but also time. It was easier for me to reschedule things if a client needed me to come in on their day or to make something work with their time. I never felt I could say no. Or my family or whatever. I would just be like, I just have a massage. Let me just reschedule that, which meant cancel it. And then with money, when we don't feel that we're worth keeping or spending money on ourselves, we're like, well, what am I supposed to do with it? I guess I'll just give it away. So thankfully my husband's like, let's put it in investment so you don't even know you have money. So that was the best.
It's not directly in front of you going, spend me, give me away.
That was one of the biggest money mindset hacks. Like, because I realized I'm like, okay, I notice once my bank account hits 10 grand that I'm like, oh, that's too much. We need to get rid of it. So I would spend it. So now if it gets over 5 grand, that plan is to put it into whatever's there, just goes into investments. And then I just don't see it. Yeah. And it has been helpful because I basically took a year off of working, like really trying to get clients or whatever, that I had the savings that I had finally that I forgot about.
Sure.
And it was great because then I was like, okay, I don't have to panic or react or take a client that I don't really feel like I'm ready to take a client,
And see, for me, like I'll still get into those panic modes. Like, and I have that kind of same, all right, when this hits 10, like that's now 0, right? So anything above that is fluff money, right? I can do whatever I want with it, like whether it's stupid or not.
Well,
right. But even still there are savings, there are, investments over here, but it's also like, I feel like my default is or can be that panic mode because panic 100%. Puts me into action puts me into production produces more money.
Yeah.
But the downside to that is it's not fucking true. And
at what cost?
Right. Yeah. And time, a lot of people are like, time is money. Time is well more than money. You can't.
I always say that. I'm like, money is infinite. Time is not. Listen, Like my time just got exceptionally more expensive when I started to realize that. I was like, oh no, I can't get any of that back, but I can always make more money.
Yes.
Which I don't know. My husband's always like, okay, but still, because I'm like, it's just money.
Uh-huh.
Like, okay, but also.
Yeah, my CFO's like, are you sure you need that? Like, I'm like,
I'm like,
it's all right.
yes,
It's okay.
it's just money. Yeah. But I think that's like, again, that goes into all the mindset stuff around like, this is my biggest advice to, if I could go back to 2014 Teri, I would say get yourself a coach or into therapy or doing your self development while also building your
Yes.
business. Because I didn't really start doing that until probably until I started learning more about body image, to be honest, to help my clients. So about 3 years in, I didn't really start. I was always doing a little bit of self-development because neuroscience is cool. But like ultimately really like becoming a role model of it didn't really
Mhm.
start until 3 years into the business. So I always say work as hard on yourself as you do on your cost of doing business or your business plan. Also, the other good advice that I received was when you're planning your business, also plan your exit strategy
Yes.
because you want to figure out how do I want this to end? Because I never did that. And then the transition for me to move from photographer to educator, I don't have a plan. So I had to start from scratch. And so of course, naturally it was terrifying as opposed to had I thought about that, like, oh, I can see this and this and this, I could have had a plan in place. Does that make sense? So
Absolutely. So I built my business plan for my studio the same time I was building a business plan for a sake brewery. And the sake brewery was supposed to be like retirement. That was going to be like worldwide scale it. Like that was it. And after 3 years, like we crashed and burned. Um, but it got me thinking about exit strategy. And that's actually why my business was never called like Cat Ford Coats Photography or Ford
mhm.
Coats this or da 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 da. Because the exit is I want to be able to sell the studio one day, right?
Yeah.
Or the education platform that also happens to have a studio in it. And I can't do that if it's got my name on it.
Yeah. And mine was the opposite now. So I'm like, oh no, I want to be able to, like, I don't want to have to worry about selling stuff. Like, that's not in my vision for
Mm-hmm.
what is for me. Is like, I'm like, I just want to have the freedom to be able to take my name and apply it to the next thing. So that way, so that's why my Instagram is just always Teri Hofford now. Instead of my first photography name, fun fact, was Keyhole Photography and Design.
Oh
Let me
dear.
unlock your creativity.
Teri.
So, anyways,
Teri.
so
Oh my God. And as a
anyway,
boudoir photographer.
that's not
Oh,
that's not as bad as the time I made a Tough Love Terry logo and made my name the shaft of a penis. That is a whole other thing that shows up
that
once a
is a
year in my
whole other
Instagram
thing.
stories. I was like, nobody needs to see this, but I still share it once a year. So
Once in a blue moon,
this is why you
definitely.
should hire a branding specialist.
Yes.
Just
It's
saying.
interesting. I saw a post this morning and it's from a friend of mine, but she was talking, she's a small business owner as a stylist. And branding in the beginning of the year is always like, woo, branding, new, update
Mhm.
this and that and the other thing. And she was like, if I see one more post about branding, I'm going to scream. I built my business this way and through word of mouth and excellent service and, la, 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 la. And she was like, I am not a brand, I am a person. And I took everything I had to not be like, you're both love.
Well, and that even that in itself, like having conversations, if you want to be a personal brand, I listened to a really good podcast about that. Is like, what sacrifices do you have to make in order to be a personal brand?
Yes.
Because like the whole idea behind branding is that it's a legacy. Like you want it to be a legacy, a long-standing thing, a recognizable thing in the future. But people are not stagnant and legacies. They change constantly all the time.
Absolutely.
And so that's something that I had to like kind of realize is like, okay, how can I create a personal brand and set expectations that I am and it is going to change with me? How can I make sure that people are on board with that so that my business doesn't dip at all?
Well,
Um,
I've always sort of come at that from the space, and this is with branding clients across the board, especially like my destination clients. They've had a lot of the same, like, okay, how do we set up the visual assets for this? And right, because I'm going to morph, whether they're in coaching or education, like there is that evolution space. And really, like, you have to understand that your legacy isn't you. Your legacy is the impact that you have for other people.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to do that from an authentic voice, visually and otherwise, right, allows you to evolve whatever that brand goes through, right, with intention based off of the values and the purpose that you have.
Which is why it's important to stay attached to your purpose and not get sidetracked and put everyone into the same damn posing box unless that is what your purpose is. It just wasn't my purpose. But that is why I think one of the things I encourage creatives or just any business person, to be honest, to do is reflect really look every quarter and say, okay, what decisions have I made this quarter that are in alignment with the mission and the purpose, and what decisions have I made as a business and as a person that are out of alignment? Because then you're making small course corrections instead of waiting until you're way the hell over here to be like, uh-oh, I think we've landed in the wrong place, right? So like constantly asking those questions of yourself, and having, I think they call it like a state of the union meeting with yourself, or you do it with a partner for in relationships. They call it the state of the union to check in. And so because I work by myself, I have my state of the union meeting once a month with myself to check in and be like, okay, let's just, I like made a whole workbook about it for myself to help me like just take a look. Where do we spend our money? What are we happy we spend our money on? Where do we spend our time? How close are you to your goals? Like really just reevaluating things to be like, oh, you know what? I set this goal, but I don't even really feel attached to it anymore. It just felt good at the time. Like, then you can make those decisions from a critical, strategic place again, instead of reacting to them when ultimately they do or do not happen later on down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that, a state of the union. I've always just referred to it as a board meeting. Like, even if you're a solopreneur, like bring your family in. Yeah. Right. Your partner, your best friend, whatever. Like, so you can take that bird's eye view and say like, okay. And then you get feedback from them on, well, was that really in alignment? You know, I get that a lot for coaching. They're like, is it as valuable as you think it is? And I'm like, you can't take it away from me. No. Like,
it's like, yes, it is. And you get all defensive about it. And then you're like, go think about it. And it's like, maybe they were right. That's what I do.
Maybe like, for the studio wardrobe. Obviously. The studio wardrobe for sure.
Yeah. And then like 6 months later, I'm like, I have the best idea ever. And my husband's always like, do you? Wow. If only somebody had told you that sooner.
Oh my goodness. I love it when the board is right and they want to just like, and I believe we had that conversation 6 weeks ago.
Yeah. They're like, she'll get there. She'll get there. They know how to deal with strong, independent women.
Well, Teri, what is next for you?
Well, that's a great question. I'm going to Australia on Saturday. We're recording this, which is fun. But really, I really want to step up in my education and speaking space. So I want to step outside the photography industry a little bit. And I'm going to be doing my book tour in the summer, which I'm excited about. But it is just going to be a Canadian book tour to start to make sure I actually... Well, listen, I need to make sure that I actually want to do it. So I figured I better start small instead of just going ham, and figuring out a visa situation. I was like, we're just going to do it in Canada to do it and then see how it goes. But you can come visit me in Canada at any of the stops. But this has been something that I've been wanting to do since I released the Geo Theory back in 2020, which I couldn't obviously do a book tour. Or even a reading because everything was shut down. So yeah, I decided 2024 is going to be the year I'm finally going to do it. And then my husband and I are actually in a transition. Potentially at the end of the year, we're moving to a new city. So I don't want to actually take on too many other things aside from that, just because we don't know what, when, how all that's going to play out. So a lot of my stuff's happening up until August, and then I have body image boot camp in October. But aside from that, not really too much planned for that at the moment.
That still sounds like a lot, Teri.
Well, I know, but for me, it isn't a lot, but it is.
Well, you're a
lot.
producer, right? Like create.
I make a lot of stuff. Yeah, so this is like it. I'm like, yeah, one thing a month. Basically, I have a writing workshop next month, which is fun. Yeah, just lots of fun stuff.
Well, where can people find you?
Oh God, so many places. So if you're interested in body image stuff, we'd love to have you in Mexico at Body Image Boot Camp, which you can find on Instagram at Body Image Boot Camp, or the website bibcgonewild.com. Or you can check me out at my website, terihofford.com, which is spelled Terihofford, because everyone spells it wrong. And then at Teri Hofford on Instagram. I'm also on Facebook, but most of the stuff I do is Instagram transferred over to Facebook. So.
And we'll actually have all of these links for you in the description below as well, whether you're listening to the podcast or on YouTube. So you can just pop down and click the link that suits you best. Teri, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I love a good chat.
Oh, yes, absolutely. 1000%. And guys, thank you so much for listening to the Studio Takeover. Definitely give Teri a follow. I know I'm looking at Mexico myself, but there's potential. You could come with us.